Welcome to Step 3, Research Planning. In Steps 1 and 2, we formulated focused research questions and we analyzed sources that of what we had to start our research process with that we had on hand already through timeline construction and other strategies. Now we're bridging analysis to action. Research planning isn't about perfection so much as it's a methodical work over haphazard, aimless clicking and scrolling without direction or discipline. This presentation covers two phases. The first one I want to consider the broad sweep, surveying what's already readily discoverable and has already been discovered, and targeted planning, particularly focusing on what's unknown and what has not been looked at in the past by others. Understanding both separates professionals from hobbyist genealogists with Sunday driver-like mentalities. So where are we in the research cycle? So to orient yourself, at this stage, we've already completed steps 1 and 2. We have a focused research question, we've done our timeline analysis, and other basic foundational steps. Step 3, we transform that work into action. As the cycle, then as we work to the next steps, the cycle will eventually return to step 1. After conclusions generate our new questions. You will find very quickly, and I've said this multiple times, this isn't often a truly linear process. It tends to be iterative, type spiral. Step 3 doesn't exist in isolation. Your research questions do guide what sources matter, and your timelines and other analytical tools reveal gaps and conflicts in what's already been examined and looked at, or what you don't know already versus what you want to know. Without that planning, and having that foundation, one is simply guessing. Research planning has two phases, in my experience, that serve different purposes. Phase A is what I call the broad sweep. This is where I survey major systems to establish what's already discovered or discoverable. This due diligence catches work that's already been done. You might find that another genealogist has done extensive work on the family you're doing research on and has spent many hours going through deep collections. It'd be foolish not to have their insights for somebody that's already gone in and tried to solve the question, or maybe if we even already have answered it, and then it turns into a question of figuring out if they got the answer right. Then phase B is where targeted planning comes in. There are 5 components from research like a pro, and you focus on what's generally unknown, and you prioritize strategically, and then you document that methodology so that's repeatable in the future. If you skip phase A, you risk reinventing wheels, potentially hours, days, weeks, sometimes months on research already documented. Although it might be comforting to know that it made sense to you and that you came to the same conclusions independently. If you're doing work for somebody else and they're paying for it, you have to explain why that redo was worth their money. And also if you skip phase B, where you don't plan what sources you're going to be looking at, you find yourself clicking randomly. Phase A informs phase B, what you find or don't. shapes your targeted planning. So why does the broad sweep matter? I may have just mentioned this in the prior slide, but if you skip the broad sweep and there was something that was readily listed, discoverable, you've been negligent. If you're doing professional level work, clients expect you to find the low-hanging fruit before digging in and doing specialized research, and so that way that when you're doing that very deep specialized research, you're informed, and you also know if you really need to really dig in deep. What if the answers to your research question are easily found on top by doing top surface level work? Do you need to spend hours diving in deep when there was a clear, reliable, well-sourced answer already at your fingertips? The broad sweep establishes one's baseline. My favorite client statement to make is when I find something that was particularly hard to locate. I'm able to say to them with confidence that this was not already known by anybody else, not by them, not by anybody I could find online readily. That what I found was valuable because it just wasn't stuff that just came up in a standard search that could be easily found by anybody with searching family search or an easy ancestry broad search or my heritage, etc. That statement, I can't make that if I didn't do my broad sweeps, my general homework first. I can't claim that something was hard to find if I never checked if it was easy. And in my time as Price Genealogy's clerical director, I've got to see projects where the wheel had been reinvented. They even put in the instructions that the client was familiar with genealogy, had already looked at many common sources and had a compiled tree already, but they did the research from scratch and presented everything like it was brand new. We knew it wasn't brand new to the client, and the client wouldn't be happy. We had to pay for it to be redone, unfortunately on our dime, and that meant the project didn't make a profit, which when you're running a business, not making money off a project is a very quick way to find yourself figuring out how you're going to be making payroll or paying your expenses. That's a position no business ever wants to be in. All right. So you might want to understand. I have touched on what can be searched in the broad phase. Because first, I always start at family search. It's main database, it's tree, it's partner sites. You have like Ancestry, My Heritage, Find My Past. There's Story. There's a bunch of GeneNet. There's a bunch of stuff, and of course, it also has you can search Google with it and can help you formulate queries with that. That reminds me of something I learned about at a Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy course, SLIG. It's simple. So one of the components of the genealogical proof standard, GPS, genealogical standards, is that no research isn't reasonably exhaustive, but it isn't reasonably exhaustive until you've done a Google search, because you never know. You can't say that you've really looked at everything until or picked sources. You've looked everywhere that a competent genealogist would look for answers. If you haven't done a search on the general internet, which is second part, general searches. Googling with genealogy operators, you'd be surprised. Sometimes you'll find obituaries, newspapers, published genealogies, blog posts from cousins, and other parties who have done substantial work. It's also a great tool for networking. If you find those cousins, they might have a lot of information and original documentation that could save you a lot of time. Third, this kind of where second and third can blend in. I'm an advocate of using AI deep research tools like Claude's and other AI systems deep research modes. For me, I view it as another pair of eyes crawling the web. ChatGPT has an agent mode, which you only get so many per month if you have a standard package. So you have to be wise with them. Same with Claude. But if you're going to do a series search, I always believe in giving it what you know and having it crawl the internet. And you can also have it look for resources and whatnot to help guide your search as well. You'd be surprised. You can really dig in deep and find obscure hobbyist level stuff on those deep search results that you might not personally get to, and provide you an excellent springboard to start your own research. Like, the goal here is to see what pops up, leverage what others have found, identify what's truly unknown. That distinction, discoverable versus required target work, is fundamental, in my opinion and experience. So let's see. I've recently been doing a project for a client out of Scotland, the McKinsey family. So I surveyed family search. I discovered that there was many generations that were already represented, and many sources were attached, and it was easy. Now allowed me to see that the conclusions reached had been adequately documented. Now, did that mean that there was nothing to do? Not necessarily. The value that I brought to the table, I did some supplemental searches to enrich and to make sure that the intergenerational connections made by others were accurate. It laid in rigorous evidence analysis supporting those linkages to the genealogical proof standard. Tree entries without analysis are not proven conclusions. They are hypotheses waiting verification. Knowing what existed shaped my approach. Instead of discovering connections so much, I focused on verification. Resolving conflicts I found in the evidence presented in the sources attached that existed. Building evidentiary cases that transformed speculation into defensible conclusions. Most importantly, I put it in writing. The value here wasn't reinventing wheel. It was bringing rigor to existing work, discovering what others had missed, pushing beyond where they stopped. You can't do that without knowing where somebody else stopped. So, documenting broad sweeps. Logging searches for broad, like say searching. I did a general search of family search, their index collections, their ancestry general search collections. It might seem pointless to document those searches that you did make, but that documentation does serve beyond memory. Recording positive and negative results. What you found mattered. What you didn't find matters too. What you searched and didn't find matters. Negative research results logged prevent researching the same databases 6 months later. They become diagnostics. Why didn't this show up? Oh, I used the wrong spelling variant, or this was, or really, it could have been a fluke, and that's something you can present in your findings. Research reports, many say, shouldn't be travel logs. But for me, writing a client report, you do have to justify your time, and if something showed up that looked like it should have just popped up in a general index search, you have to be able to explain why it didn't. So keywords help you understand your patterns. When you find something later, you trace why the original searches missed it. Were there indexing variants? Was there a wildcard that could have been used to have brought that up earlier? Documentation creates audit trails. It allows you to answer questions like, did you check family search? You can point to your log. I did. You can tell you when you did in that process, what terms you used, what records you found. That's just simply professionalism, in my opinion. I have a column in my research logging calendar with a why column. What question was I asking? Who was I looking for? That context matters more than mechanics. The limitations of index-only searching. There was a pioneer in Swedish research. He was a guy who wrote the book Cradled in Sweden. There's a passage in there that I particularly remember where he mentioned how much he enjoyed looking through things page by page manually. And he said that there would be something that would be lost when all one would have to do is look at an index to find what you were looking for. I agree, to a point. You never know parish register or document set better than when you have to look at it page by page. You get to learn the record keeper's habits, their idiosyncrasies, shortcomings of the record keeping. You understand why something might be missing. There was a project I recently completed where I discovered a very haphazardly kept parish register. There were some index. I was really struggling to find a marriage entry that should have been there. The couple, I believe, was local, and I was really surprised that I couldn't find it. But what I learned taught me something. I learned that the record keeper was very inconsistent with how they kept records. That even if the book was indexed, or you wouldn't know who half the entries applied to. Names were really common. You needed locations of residence. Persson, Svensson. If you don't know what farm they're from, it's really hard to keep track of identity, particularly when there's so many of them running around. The joys of Scandinavian research. I wasn't surprised I didn't find it. It was apparently that much was never recorded properly, and it was really inconsistent. Index searches, I would have, if that was already an indexed book, I would have never had that perspective. I may have reached the conclusion that maybe the couple was just from somewhere else. I didn't get that bird's eye community view. No sense of how families interacted as godparents, because that sort of information isn't typically indexed. Wouldn't see how common or uncommon illegitimacy was, or what the common occupations were, what the keepers cared about, were interested in, for various years and periods. In analysis, you would have been robbed. If you just had an index, I would have been robbed of that context. All you'd have is a few records mentioning your person. Sure, I would have found them really quick, but I would have lost the context. In a sense, it's a double-edged sword. Limited times, massive collections, indexes are invaluable, but at a minimum, maybe you can negate some of that loss by looking at the surrounding pages. Relatives, you'd be surprised, often appear on the same page before or after in so many records I've looked at over the years. So jumping back to the rest of the research process, you've completed your broad sweep. You know what's documented. You've identified your gaps. You've spotted conflicts. You know what's truly a question mark. This is the transition. Everything forward focuses on what isn't easily discoverable. So if your sweep show military service well documented with attached pension file images, you don't need to prioritize ordering anything from NARA for U.S. research. But if you find conflicting information with indexes for conflicting regiment information with no further original records, then it becomes a higher priority. You want to order that. Or if it's not, even if there isn't a conflict and all you have is just the index, particularly if it's a pensioner for something like the Civil War, for people that lived, most of their lives before the 20th century, it becomes a really high priority to obtain that documentation. It might have documents where what it says might be the only place that you ever find concrete documentation for that establishes a relationship or the timeline of somebody's life. Phase A shapes Phase B. Sequential steps in unified planning are critical to success. So I previously mentioned that there's 5 components to a good targeted research session. So Phase B follows Diana Elder's and Nicole Dyer's research like a pro methodology. They're personal colleagues of mine. I've worked with Diana Elder in the past with Price Genealogy before their family locket organization really took off and they became the success that they are now. Your step 1 objective guides everything. Your step 2 timeline and other preliminary analysis methods produce your summary of known facts. Your Phase A sweeps reveal what's truly unknown. Now you get to formulate a hypothesis, identify sources, and prioritize. What's different from planning without Phase A is you're not starting from scratch. You're not guessing. You're building on a framework of knowledge of what's documented and what gaps remain. You focus on what isn't easily findable. Anyone can run a family search or an Ancestry.com search, but not everybody can navigate courthouse records, interpret probate jurisdictions, or identify less obvious archival collections. Step 1. List the research objective. So, restate your objective at your plan's top. It's ideal that you have a document that you write this down. It might seem silly, but it really does make a big difference. They become the lenses for every planning decision you make. I did a project where I researched my second great grandfather, Henry Clay Bagley. My objective was very simple: to document and analyze his Civil War service. I didn't know a whole lot about it. I had some general index cards and some mentions of it in various documents, but I didn't know the particulars about his service. But I did have some information to go in to help me with my search. I had key identifiers: his birth date, his death date, and record types to consult and what I'd already looked at. What I wanted to determine was the precise dates of his enlistments, his company assignments, and anything else related to his service. Equally important was what the objective excluded. I did not want to research siblings. I wasn't particularly interested in tracing his post-war ventures, not reconstructing his life beyond his service. Just one focused objective, one phase. Maybe I've learned some things that would be interesting from this particular research session, but those would be put aside. For client work, this communicates scope. For person research, it prevents sidetracking. For BCG portfolios, it demonstrates ability to define manageable phases. So, component 2. Summarize the known facts. So combining step 2 timelines with phase A's findings, we extract what's pertinent. Not necessarily the entire timeline that you have for somebody, particularly if it's just a section of somebody's life, like, say, my second great-grandfather's Civil War service. The Civil War was was between 1861 and 1865. He lived between 1845 and 1931. So, relatively short segment. So what I did is I summarizing his records revealed conflicting conflicts. I discovered that there was 2 military units that showed up on records, and that there was a 31-year gap between his discharge and his pension application, and there was dates that conflicted that didn't make sense. So this is where a set shift occurred. These weren't just interesting discrepancies, they were signposts directing priorities. The unit conflict meant I needed his compiled military service records, CMSRs, for both his regiments. The pension gaps suggested explanatory affidavits. Conflicting dates meant I needed to prioritize original records. Every conflict became a research target. So component 3, create a working hypothesis. A hypothesis isn't the answer. It's an educated guess based on evidence that's open to disproof. My hypothesis was that the 7th Illinois Cavalry was Henry's main service. The 103rd Infantry represented something minor or conflation. Why? Because the mention of the 7th Illinois Cavalry appeared in more sources, and pension records would reflect primary service. The 103rd reference appeared in derivative sources where I didn't have documentation. I was not assuming I was right with my preliminary analysis. I stated the testing methodology to compare compiled military service records for units, cross-reference regimental histories, examine muster rolls for temporal overlap. Separation. Your hypothesis should suggest it's a testing method. If you can't articulate how to test it, it's not useful. You need to be open to being wrong. Remember, you're here to uncover the truth, not to simply validate what you believe you already know. And being able to accept when evidence contradicts what you previously assumed or believed about your research subject. So, identifying sources and methods. Locality knowledge pays dividends. Don't just list random record types, identify special sources relevant to your objective's time, place, and question. For my Civil War research, there was a 3-phase approach. Phase 1, foundational records, the compiled military service records, pension file, and muster rolls. Phase 2 was verification and context. I utilized the Illinois State Archives collections, regimental histories, and their specialized databases. Phase 3 was conditional. If petitions contained witness affidavits, I would expand, particularly of comrades. I expand to fan club research on the associates because I wanted to know more about his military service and his experience. So this demonstrated strategic thinking. I wasn't going to search every possible Civil War record out there. I identified the sources that were most likely to answer my specific questions, and prioritizing based off likelihood of success and how likely they were to contain answers to the questions I was seeking, or contain the information that I was looking for. This is following BCG's, the Board for the Certification of Genealogists, Standard 16. Plans may initially comprise only one or a few sources. You map out your next logical steps. Your research plan does not necessarily have to include an exhaustive bibliography because research changes, and many of those sources might end up being thrown out when you discover a new detail that forces you to readjust and plan to research in whole new sets of collections, while a majority of a lengthy list might be ruled irrelevant. So component 5, prioritizing sources. Effective planning versus overwhelming lists. We don't have unlimited amounts of time, particularly when you are on the clock. You can't look at absolutely everything all the time. Sometimes you might only be able to get partway through a list, so knowing how to effectively plan involves prioritizing strategically. So, following Diana Elder's guidance in the courses that I've attended and have put into practice, I found, and she has found, it's best to keep it brief. At most, 5 sources, which is also what I've heard from other individuals such as Paul Graham of Ancestry ProGen, in a course I took from him. You should always check online first because it's the easiest to get to. You have to consider the time required. You should start with the sources most likely to answer your question, which brings up a really important point. You shouldn't wait for perfect planning to order archival materials. Remember, sometimes NARA can take up to 6 to 8 weeks for pension files, or even longer if there's been a government shutdown like there was in the middle of my project. But that's a story for later. Had to wait until after the shutdown, and I hired a private party to obtain the files because I couldn't wait any longer. So I made a plan. First stop is that I looked for the compiled service records and saw what was accessible via Fold 3 because that was the first place you should typically go with U.S. research. Because sometimes they have full compiled service records and pensions already there. And that's when I found out my guy's stuff wasn't there, and that's when I had to order files from the archives at NARA. Let's see. Waiting would have cost... Anyways. So sometimes you have to find alternative activities to do while you're waiting for things that you can't control. There was some useful contextual research I did on the regiments that would help me, once I got the pension file, understand what I was working with, understand what the regiments were doing, so that when I saw those dates mentioned, I would know where the guy was throughout the process. And what I did after that depended on what I found out when the file got back. So this is an example of what I call parallel processing, doing digital or local research while waiting for our distant archives to get back to you and retrieving what you need. This, I find, maximizes productivity within real time constraints. But you have to remember, plans change, so you shouldn't overplan. You can plan too much. And the biggest thing is it might be really educational to learn about everything available for a particular area, but if most of it doesn't end up being relevant, you've wasted a lot of time. All right. documentation. Completing both these phases, you have to document them. For me, I find keeping a research calendar is a valuable primary tool for when you have a single research subject or a small amount of subjects. Then there's research like the Prose by Diana Elder's Family Locket. She introduces and pushes her air tables, which can be recreated somewhat with creativity with Google Sheets as well, with spreadsheet books. But the big thing, because you can, and the reason why her method works really well is because it allows you to document DNA matches in a lot of different parties, and it has database cross-linking that really matters if you have you have broad fan clubs and lots of people involved in your research problem, and there's a lot of moving components. For more simple problems, I find that's just way too many bells and whistles and hassle compared to a research calendar. So, one's research calendar, I personally do most of my work in Google Docs. It's really convenient. It makes sure that I never have the problem of, darn, my research calendar is on my desktop at home, and I just had this auspicious visit, or the ability to visit this archive or my family history center that I wasn't expecting. What am I going to be able to do? If you have it already on Google Drive, you can just log in real quick, pull up your calendar, you're right into business. You're able to get right to it and have everything that you've already looked at your fingertips, and you'll be able to take advantage of those spontaneous moments. So here's what I usually have. So I have like the date of the search. Why does this matter? Well, it matters particularly online if something goes offline, to say like I looked at this day, and to log when you did stuff. It's also really useful for cross-referencing and billing too if you have to pay money to look for stuff, and to get a sense of how productive your sessions were, etc. Then there's repository. Usually I'll divide that into repository and then collection title, search terms, results, which are positive or negative. Then I usually, the one that's most important, that's often overlooked, is the why. What questions were you trying to answer? That context often matters more than the mechanics. I was determining what unit my guy Henry served in, so I searched these databases. So something that a lot of people don't know is that if you're trying to become accredited, it's considered good form to be able to explain why you picked a record type to search out, being able to explain what were you expecting to find in that collection that would be relevant to answering your research problem. Knowing the why beforehand shows forethought, careful, deliberate, methodical methodology. Anyways, just a little insight there. So my advice here is eventually you're going to have to write a research report, because remember, genealogy it's not proven until it's in writing. And I'd recommend writing as you research. And some people will have a whole separate column of just dedicated to commentary, finding what they thought versus what was actually written. The process is deeply interconnected. You can do multiple steps at once, mindful of each step ahead, planning, executing, analyzing, and documenting. They all tend to weave together. But the ultimate test is I can't talk today. being able to replicate it. Someone should follow your steps and reach the same conclusions. They can't. It's not defendable research, just like it wouldn't be in a scientific context. You can't repeat the science experiment and get the same results. It's not good science. It's bad science. And we've all heard about people who fudged results to get what they want, so they can make a certain conclusion. It's bad science, and it means that you can't rely on that person's work. The professional reality. I keep mentioning about what it's like to be a professional, but here's some notes. Here's an honest budget about time constraints. 40 hours, that's like a full week, and you'd be extremely lucky to get it. It's usually adequate for all but the absolute most complex problems that you might have to deal with. Usually it's usually adequate time to solve multiple problems in that time, extend the pedigree multiple generations, assuming that you don't encounter any unusual road bumps. 20 hours is usually what most people end up ordering in industry recommended minimum. There's quite a few companies that won't do less than 20 hours. And then there's 10 hours, which sadly is what I end up having to agree to, because there's a lot of clients who find ordering 20 is just too much. 10 hours seems more what they're wanting to pay for at once. But I'll just tell you what 10 hours looks like in practice. It's a mad dash. You have to learn the environment, the history and context fast. You're searching frantically. It's not really adequate to do very particularly high quality methodical work. Although I can do quite a bit, I just know that there's corners that you have to cut in order to do it. What gets sacrificed? For example, in Swedish research, I don't get to do my every year searches, checking every tax list across the lifespan of the person. I might only be looking at a smattering of years around major events. I get often left with that feeling that perhaps there might be something valuable in what I didn't get to look at. That's triage, not reasonably exhaustive research. Although one could argue that reasonably exhaustive might just be that. It was reasonably exhaustive for that situation. It's a big debate what reasonably exhaustive means. It's one of those great ways to get in a fight with a genealogist. Well, I wouldn't say a fight, more like a very heated, passionate debate. Like, what constitutes a properly formatted citation? So if you find yourself at Roots Tech or another genealogy conference and you want a really passionate, in-depth discussion, you have two questions to really spark a serious controversy around. I've more than I care to admit have taken 10-hour jobs that really needed 20. It's hard to turn down work, but it's a recipe for frustration. But I find that if I'm realistic, set my expectations and say, hey, 10 hours really isn't a lot here, but if the scope doesn't match the budget, it's best to say so. Client's point isn't so much that isn't the document. Oftentimes, the client will never see it, but what it's good for is ensuring methodical research over haphazard research. When time is limited, strategic clarity becomes critical. So, another thing about professional reality, the project scope. There are two project types, and clients should understand what they're commissioning. Type 1 is orientation. Whole project just getting to know the problem. Learning what's already known, getting to learn about the locality, the records available for it, establishing the baseline before solving, which we've already mentioned should be done for all projects, but this is where you spend a whole project just doing that. And that's really important for things like working in the American South in the antebellum period. Complex immigration, in places or other problems where there's sparse, destroyed records, or where there's already been a lot of people trying to solve the same problem. For some difficult problems, that the first 10 to 20 hours might just be establishing that baseline. So in this case, you have to set your expectations very clearly. The first session is going to be spent understanding what's known and what exists. The second will be active research based on what's learned. And this has come from Ancestry ProGen. This is what they tell and recommend their own clients all the time. And I find that if clients are understanding and accepting of this is how it's going to be, they're more likely to be satisfied. They're not going to be surprised that the first session didn't give them anything new, but merely it was a deep, thoughtful, careful analysis of what was there. So the next session would be productive. Because everybody and their uncle has been trying to figure out who the father of so-and-so was for over a generation. They understand that if Grandpa worked on this problem their whole lives and didn't get an answer, that it's not realistic to expect a single person to solve the problem in just 20 hours. They're going to need a lot of context to really dig into it. So next, this jumps into the importance of working in blocks, avoiding rabbit holes. There have been some casual projects that I've done where I've went through a lot of records, or I guess in this case DNA matches, where I spent many hours without really writing anything up. And I sat back and went, I'm done with that, great. But now I have to synthesize this into a report so that it's genealogical proof. But without those modular reports done in regular intervals, that synthesis became a nightmare. But then there's other dangerous rabbit holes. You might know the feeling. This person that you see might be a relative. If I looked at their records, or one more search here might just tie everything up. Hours later, you might find yourself asking, where was I? Why did I start down this path? So here's a pro tip about the tantalizing maybes. Write them in your future research recommendations. You know, the part in the report you should be writing, explaining what you could do next in the future. So you don't have to chase them immediately, but they don't get forgotten. They don't derail your current session. Research plans can help you avoid side quests that you work on for hours. Do you feel the pull of a rabbit hole? Check your plan. Is this in the current objective? Well, this is likely going to lead to solving your problem. No? Put it in your future research. There's time management systems like Pomodoro. I probably really mispronounced that. It's that Italian system where you work for like 20 minutes, then take a break, and you work for another 20 minutes, you take a 5-minute break. Then after 2 hours, you take a 30-minute break. The whole point of it is that the intentional self-interruption prevents you from mindlessly wandering and gives you a chance to stop and self-check yourself. Your plan is partly a defense against your own curiosity and killing your productivity. You know, curiosity killed the cat. Yeah. So, parallel processes, which I have mentioned. Archival lead times can be a while. Many places have week-long wait times for requests. So if you have to wait for you to have everything perfectly planned before you order it, you could be missing deadlines or wasting months. Many client projects you do, I find here's something. Often you get a commission, and you should always give like a generous window, like a couple months. Why? So you can do a preliminary research, give yourself plenty of time to put in orders for things, and then be able to get those back and incorporate them into your research before you have to turn into your client, rather than wait, having your schedule booked all the way through. Don't pay single attention to anything until until about a couple weeks before your deadline, where you finally get to that project. Then discover, oh crap, there's a record that if I would have ordered like a month ago, I could have for this project and get better results. Instead, you might have to push that as a recommendation, and that's unfortunate because that means you didn't get the client everything that they could have out of that session. So it's important to complete enough preliminary planning to know what materials you need and order them immediately, and continue planning and doing other digital research while you're waiting, as I mentioned earlier. And also strategic timing. When you have completed your preliminary planning, you can ask some focus questions. You can say, I need the pension file for my person from this company, and you might have an application number. It's more effective than saying, just send me anything on Civil War veterans with this surname, or this name. If you have something targeted, you're more likely to get better answers and better and quicker service. Planning lets you work smarter. The value proposition. As I mentioned, the biggest thing that you can do as a professional, in my opinion, is to make sure that they understand the value of what you've done for them. Being able to say that something wasn't truly already known, what you found was valuable because it advanced the research in a meaningful way, and you know you didn't reinvent the wheel, and what you brought was new, original, fresh. You're proving that you added value and didn't duplicate effort needlessly. So with my case study, as I mentioned, we brought all the phases together. Phase A reveals critical information. I found gaps in the what was there hadn't been found. I found there wasn't a complete compiled military service record online added to available yet or online. No complete pension files. That shaped everything. And my phase B built on those. I focused on getting those records and learning about what wasn't already stated and what could be readily located from my own desktop, from my own home. So that strategic navigation of completed information maintained continuing momentum. And if you do this, you can order your critical records early, conduct digital research while waiting, and you can document your methodology throughout. Professional research planning is best done in practice. So bridging forward, a recap. Phase A establishes baseline, catches existing work. Remember, an index-only search has severe limitations. You should look beyond single entries whenever possible. Phase B uses 5 components to focus on what's genuinely unknown. Objects provide guides to your research. Examining your known facts helps you identify where there's conflicts in evidence that need to be resolved. And that having a hypothesis suggests that there's the question then that can be tested that could lead to an answer of yay and nay, whether or not what you're assuming is correct or not, based off what you're extrapolating based off of prior evidence. And sometimes your research may entirely blow everything out of the water and completely change your preliminary assumptions. You select your sources strategically, and you also should prioritize. Your priorities should account for constraints. Together, you have added value and not reinvented wheels. Reality is messier than the sequential steps of a flow chart. Planning, executing, documenting, and analyzing weave together into a tapestry of excellent professional research. That interconnection is the feature. And thinking ahead enriches outputs. So coming up is step 3B, because this is step 3A, where we cover execution and documentation, working in blocks, research calendars, report drafting, and time management, and knowing when to stop. Step 4, source citations. Could somebody find the original if the link, your online website link broke? Remember, plan strategically and get results. These are some sources for deeper study. I highly recommend looking into Research Like a Pro by Elder and Dyer. They provide a lot of foundation and templates and practical guidance. Diane's seminars add considerable insight from her extensive teaching experience. I'd also advocate looking at BCG's genealogical standards, particularly standards 19 through 18. These provide professional expectations for research planning. Even if you're not going to get a certification, these provide an excellent framework for proper research. Also, DeGrazia's Planning Effective Research provides practical insights from a working professional. And also, my case studies of this is I used to draw from and putting together this presentation. This is a field where I find that you really learn by doing. So don't just simply read books and watch presentations, although that does help you develop a framework. You won't really know what you're doing as a genealogist until you go and try to do it yourself. So this is about me and my program and how I go about my philosophy. This is a series designed to embody my philosophy that demonstrating methodology in action and approaching problems, planning strategically and working through cases creates a here's me at work showcase. If you appreciate the methodology and you need professional assistance, I'm more than happy to help you. For Swedish research challenges, American cases, or even British Isles cases, any problem that requires systemic methodology, I hope that you think of Find My Family Genealogy and that you know that it is here to help. Thank you.